Well, hello everyone, and once again, welcome back to day 2 of the Expanding Business Engagement Virtual Learning Series. And this is Ahmad Mansour with SPR. So, I hope you had a great day 1. There was a lot of activities, great presentations from our subject matter experts and your own colleagues and peers. And I want to thank them. It was an exciting time yesterday. So we're going to get started today, but before we start, I would like to hand it over to Jonathan and DOL for a short hello.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ahmad. And like I said, this is a short hello. I don't really have anything new from what we said yesterday, but just to reiterate, it was a really impressive session with a lot of creativity in the room, so we look forward to more of the same today. So welcome, everybody, and back over to you, Ahmad.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan. So, and before we go on, because yesterday was such a exciting, very dynamic time, I just once again want to introduce Kristen, and Sam, and David, and Trace, who's not here today, but as always, have always been part of this team and done some great work on our events. So as we move forward, once again, you've heard this several times from me and from this voice, but we're just going to take a moment to review the instructions for using your chat. So, once again, as we know, just how it works, just in case there are new team members on the line, I'm just going to go over some brief areas. There's no polls today, so we can move on and just really focus in on chat. So first, type your questions in the text box. Then second, hit enter or click the return button, and then that's it. So just be sure that you actually return, and that you see your message, but the rest of us, that you see your message, but the rest of us will not. So if you'd like to send your message to the presenters only or to other participants, click on drop-down button and choose your intended recipient. If you do not select the recipient, the message will be sent to everyone. We'd like for you to use the chat feature to ask us questions throughout the web convening. We'll try to address them as we go during the Q&A portion. So let's, once again, we did a great job yesterday of avoiding that so-called fire alarm. We do not anticipate getting it today if we do the same thing that we did yesterday. And that is that just want to make sure that we keep our phones muted at all times unless someone's speaking, and deactivate all microphones and devices that may be in your area or connected to your computer. And then avoid using any third-party applications that may once again be connected to your computer during the session. All right, so let's go over the agenda today and get started. So once again, we're in day 2, and today we will review and have presenters to talk about dashboards and metrics from our team up in Massachusetts, Ken Messina. We'll talk about effective practices from NOB with Josh and Tim, and then we'll have a Q&A period, and then we'll tell you what to expect tomorrow, which will be our closer, and we're really excited about that as well. So let's hand it over to Kristen and get this started today. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be here again. So here's our usual roadmap slide, and here's our plan for the week. As Ahmad indicated, today we'll focus on a profile of effective practices and a dashboard and metrics developed by the team in Massachusetts. So we'll have Ken Messina on the line. He's been gracious enough to share his work with us over time, and today he'll share some stories about the effort that went into it. And then we'll shift to our partners at the National Association of Workforce Boards, Tim Aldinger and Josh Kopis, who will share a profile of an effective practice in the form of the initiative you may have heard about before called Add One. In both cases, we'll host Q&A, and then we'll reconvene tomorrow for a discussion and some hands-on activities that build our social media skills. So today is a short day, no homework, and tomorrow we've got some exciting things planned, as you know. And then in a couple of weeks, we'll meet again as a group, and we'll go over all of the resources that we've collected over time and sort of do a final session. A couple of technical issues that I want to mention for our session today. One is to be sure and keep your phone lines on mute if you're not speaking, and that's *6. There's a little window that reminds you how to turn it back on and off in the bottom left corner of the screen. And the other thing I wanted to remind you about was, in case you needed to grow your screen, there's a button up here called Full Screen. If you hit that, your screen will be bigger, and you may want to do that with some of the things that you're about to see. And then finally, we'll be showing a couple of brief videos today, and we all have different bandwidth, and so the videos may play at different speeds. Some will be quicker and some will be slower. That's one of the reasons we keep reminding you to mute your phones. But we wanted to warn you about that. So for the people who have quicker videos, quicker speed, the videos will just play straight through and you'll be done, and you'll be wondering why there's silence. And that's because we're leaving time for your colleagues who may have weaker connections and slower speeds. So just know that. There may be a couple of minutes of silence on one side or the other of the videos so that we can accommodate those different speeds. So with that, I'm going to hand the floor over to Ahmad, who's going to introduce Ken.
Great. Thanks, Kristen. So here we have Ken Messina. Ken is the statewide Rapid Response Manager for the Massachusetts Division of Career Services. Ken comes with deep knowledge on strategic partnership alignment and performance. And so in advance, I just want to thank Ken for joining us today and sharing his expertise that comes from the field. And also, I just want to encourage you all to use your chat box to ask questions. So welcome, Ken.
Thank you very much, Sam. Good to be here today. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. We were having a problem with the phone, so I know that I had a call in on another number. I was kind of on the other side of Massachusetts and kind of drove out here last minute, so I just wanted to make sure that we were all set. I wanted to first get started by just saying go Bruins. I don't know if anyone saw the Bruins game last night. No Bruins fans? I know I'm the only one from Boston on the phone, but I wanted to start with that a little bit. But the bottom line is that I know that you talk, as far as the dashboard goes, what I thought here in Massachusetts is if we're trying to show the advantages of working together, the advantages of all of the services that you can talk about as far as being provided by different agencies, you need some like or some consistent system in order to pull that all together. You know, the way that we say it always over here in Massachusetts is if the governor asks and wants to know what Massachusetts is doing as far as good things for businesses, we didn't have a consistent system that could pull all of those or all of that information together in one spot. So what we started to do and what we tried to do was form good relationships with all of the different agencies that are out there, whether it's economic development, workforce development, the college setting, basically build relationships with all of the different agencies so that we're sharing information across the board. As a matter of fact, all of the different agencies sit on all of the different committees that we've set up that exist in our business engagement program. So what we did was we actually called out to the different agencies, and there's a number of different criteria that you can see in the dashboard if you're looking at it. I mean, you're talking about, you know, jobs saved when you're talking about the work-share situation. 2,000 jobs right now exist because of the work-share program. That's highlighted there. Under the MOBD, that's the Mass Office of Business Development section, that's our economic development arm, and those are actually businesses that are expanding, and the dollar figure that you see in there indicates the money that's put in, you know, by private industry as well. So it captures a lot of different criteria in this particular dashboard, but the advantage of having a dashboard like this is across the board you can see all of the good things that are happening throughout the state of Massachusetts. Now, what I will tell you is, as far as getting this information, it's a lot easier to talk about it than to actually get it. Building the relationships with the different agencies, making sure that, you know, the confidentiality factors are okay with anything they're going to put in the dashboard. We've crossed all of those bridges, to say, in order to get this particular dashboard. And then what we did was actually, I just called out to the different agencies and asked them to send us their information. And that's where a lot of the different columns came in, as far as the different criteria is involved. What we do is quarterly, we have the different agencies call us with the information, and we dump that into the dashboard. That way we have a consistent dashboard that we can follow through and see progression all the way through. That's kind of it in a nutshell. I mean, what we're planning on doing, again, is expanding the dashboard every time we have new partners that come into the fold, and we're also working in our systems development committee on working on a system that talks to one another, so it's not, it's more automatic. That's a lot tougher than doing it the way that we did it. We actually did it by getting information from each of the agency and dumping it into an Excel spreadsheet. The best way that you could do that is to have all the systems talking to one another. That takes quite a bit more energy, I would say, or quite a bit more systems development, because in Massachusetts we have the Moses system under workforce development, where we capture all of our information. Under our economic development partners, they use Salesforce, and it goes on and on and on every time you see another, you work with another partner. So you would have to develop a system that would actually talk to each one and allow the information to be dumped in, and then you would run into a consistency problem too. As we all know, in each one of these different areas, whether it be rapid response or the career center information, if you don't have people entering the information in consistently, and then you can just imagine how it goes when you work with outside agencies as well. We're working on all of that, but for now, we're pretty happy and proud that we have a dashboard that goes across all of the different agencies that offer services for our businesses, which is expanding, and it is going to be updated quarterly, as this is the first one that we received, and quarterly we will be updating the information. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I know some of the questions that you had here and how it was developed, I think we answered that. As far as selecting the following measures, how many businesses that we were seeing, how many businesses we were saving, number of people that did not go on unemployment because of the work share, those types of things. But some of the other criteria actually was driven by what some of the other agencies were gathering, particularly, like I say, when we work with economic development, where they have tax incentive programs and some stuff that we don't really cover in rapid response. So that kind of drove some of the different columns that we had with their information. What we plan on doing is moving this towards kind of a return, or will be more of a return on investment type tool too, because you can imagine any of the information that we receive, if you save some jobs, there's a return on investment or a money factor that goes with that, the amount of UI saved when you put someone into a work share program as opposed to laying them off completely. When you save a company or you keep a company afloat, you know, how many people didn't go on unemployment. So there's a lot of that we're looking at gathering from the dashboard as we move on. Some of the other questions was, what were the hiccups putting this together, and how were they overcome? Again, the major hiccups that you have with anything like this is when you're working with other agencies and having them cooperate with you. I think that to say that building relationships with those agencies was the biggest thing that we did in order to get this dashboard moving, and even that's the biggest thing that we have going when we're working on EBE alone. So that's something that we're working on all the time. And as far as what measure still needed, as far as the measurement in the work and the areas the team is unsure about, I guess I don't know how to answer that question as far as what we're unsure about, because we're gathering information all the time. The unsurety would be whether or not we're going to continue to be able to keep getting this information, and also if we can actually set up that system that talks to one another. That's something that we're working on. And the long-term vision for the dashboard, automation, partnerships, absolutely. You know, as I said, we're meeting with new partners all the time and pulling them into the fold with the EBE program. So as we get new partners, it's getting them put on the dashboard so that we can highlight what they're doing. As far as the automation part of it, again, we are working on that in our systems develop group. And as far as that coming along, we can share that with you when we cross that bridge. That's about it. Sam?
Great. Thanks, Ken. Just want to see if there are any additional questions out there thanks for answering those questions, Ken. Just want to check and make sure that if there are any additional questions that others may have before we move forward. So there is one question here, and Ken, you may have answered this, but what surprised you once you put together the outcomes and impact measures across different programs?
I think the number of good things that are happening, to tell you quite honestly. I think that, you know, you hear about them all the time individually, Sam, but when you put them together, it really makes a much larger impact. So I think that that's a surprising thing, and you know, pleasantly surprising, to tell you the truth, because there's a lot of good things going on, and I'm sure it's similar in every state. If you could pull this together, you'd see that there's a lot of good things going on. As a matter of fact, just a quick little tidbit to you, Sam, I mean, if we could put a dashboard together that pulled together all 13 states, I bet would show a lot of return on investment right there.
Great. So how did you overcome data sharing issues? Did you need MOUs?
We did not form any MOUs. We had actually, our rapid response team had MOUs prior with the different local areas and all and everything, and we've moved on from that. And we did not form any MOUs. It's a good thought, but luckily we didn't have to. I mean, all the people who are part of our committees, and again, I think you've heard of how our team is, it's made up of literally all of the different agencies on the different teams, and I happen to sit on the Economic Development Board that approves the TIFs and the tax incentives in Massachusetts, so that might have helped a little bit on the economic development side too, but we really haven't had too many people or too many agencies say no to us once we asked.
Great. Let's see. So what are you using to collect data? Is it spreadsheets or any particular system that you would want to share?
It's just really, the Excel spreadsheet.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we're saying. I've been talking with Joe Mello, one of my staff members here, who's working on this as well. And you know, as he said, as we were saying before, we hope to integrate Moses and Salesforce and all of the different, you know, programs that other agencies have, that we can pull that together so it's more automated. But again, that's down the road a piece to really get that. I mean, I think when you start working that type of a system, which is the best way to go, that's when we're going to have to get a lot of sign-offs and agreements and security agreements and so on and so forth. But right now, it's serving the purpose as really kind of a measurement to show, you know, what we're doing in the state.
Okay. Well, Kim, we're going to try to sneak in one more question. We have about a little less than a minute. So with whom are you sharing information and how? And has it changed the conversation amongst your partners? Okay,
good question. We share, again, business engagement program has opened the eyes, I think, of a lot of people across the state. We share with all of our partners. We're sharing with business. We had a great conference in the end of May where we shared this dashboard with 160 participants in the room from all walks of life. I mean, it was, you know, business was in the room, economic development, the WIBs, all the different agencies. So we share it really amongst the WIBs. We share it with the secretaries from the state. I believe it goes all the way up to the governor's office. So it's getting some good play.
Great, thank you.
And I have shared it with DOL too, by the way. I work with Jeff Ryan and others up there, where once we started developing it, I always share any information that we have here in Massachusetts with DOL.
Okay. So, Ken, I said that was the last question. We're going to take one more, and that is, can you tell me more about your layoff aversion? Okay, I'll leave it there.
Well, the layoff aversion program is one, and again, I did work for DOL in 2009, where I know Jane Oates was pushing out quite a bit of layoff aversion initiatives, and we developed quite a few of them here in Massachusetts to try and do what we could to prevent any of the closings or layoffs. So what we did in the MOSES system, our Massachusetts One-Stop Employment System, was start working on capturing that information. And Joe Mello is here with me today. He's one of our MOSES gurus. But the thing of it is what we did was we developed a series of we'll say components or whatever it is, and where we can capture the different information in the system. So now not only do we have a rapid response system that captures the layoffs and closings, we actually have a component in the system that's layoff aversion. So if a company happens to be one that we're working on a layoff aversion, and it really has nothing to do with a layoff at all, it captures all of the activities. For instance, if we connect them with a work share program, if we connect them with a workforce training fund program, if we connect them with any of the other programs out there to try and help save that company, and it also has a number of people that are affected by those efforts that we have. So we capture that in the MOSES system to try and be more consistent and try and get all of the information so you can see what the return on investment is.
Great. Well, Ken, we want to thank you. You covered a lot in a short period of time, and really appreciate you coming online and sharing with your colleagues and with DOL and with SPR. So thank you very much for your comments today, your presentation. Okay, now we are going to move on, and would like to introduce you to Tim Aldinger and Josh Kopis, both of whom are with the National Association of Workforce Boards. Tim is the Chief Learning Officer for NOB, where he works with local and state WIBs to develop their capacity to be regional leaders and to work on talent development strategies. And Josh serves as the Vice President and COO of NOB, and he manages the day-to-day operations such as member services, communications, and development strategies for NOB, and including maintaining the relationships with both corporate, nonprofit, education, and government partners. So we want to welcome both of you and look forward to hearing what you have to say. And once again, you all, please share your questions with us as Tim and Josh start their presentation. Welcome, Tim, Josh.
Hello, is everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Unfortunately, Josh to a different meeting, so I'm going to do my best to present on his behalf. But first off, I wanted to just thank SPR for asking us to join into this research. We're really excited about this work, and I want to thank everyone on the phone for taking your time to invest in rethinking how business engagement works. Also, did want to just say a quick hello to Karen Hoops. I had the pleasure of being in Colorado the last few days and got to struggle through being in Vail with her the last couple of days. So that was really rough. As Kristen mentioned, this is going to be a mini profile, really. And so what I want to do is talk a little bit about what we're going to cover in the next hour, and we're going to focus on something that you've probably heard about called Just Add One. And in fact, just to keep everyone on their toes, I'm going to switch up the order of these bullets a little bit, but first I want to just get across the general idea of what Just Add One or Add One is all about. Talk about how that ties into a little bit of national research that we've done, that actually Kristen has done, and then some labor market analysis. Then really dig in a little bit and get a little more in the weeds with two examples. One is from Karen's neck of the woods. It's in Jefferson County in Colorado. And then the other is in Stanislaus County in California. And also to keep everyone on their toes, I'll switch those up, and I'll start with Stanislaus and then go into Jefferson County. Then I will talk a little bit about some national work that we're doing to help tie all this together and help other local areas or states help frame this in a way that is compelling, drawing on the lessons learned from some of these early pioneers. So that's what we'll do. We should have plenty of time for discussion and conversation along the way. So to start, there is a really alarmingly simple equation to just add one, and it's asking the question, what would happen to our local economies if every business in our region just added one worker? And to help frame that up, I will ask Kristen or Sam if they might, pull that video up, and here's the 45-second version of this to help tease out the idea. Chat, some of you may not have been able to hear, but hopefully you're all able to see. There actually isn't any spoken words, it's just the audio, but just the music to accompany the words. So where I want to go with this is to frame some of the bigger questions about what the big idea of Just Add One is. So really it's an approach that's about problem solving in partnership with employers. And I think it's a framework that pushes our workforce system to tap into the spirit of the demand-driven vision of the Workforce Investment Act that's often been so elusive to put on the ground over the last decade. You also see that it really encourages collaboration across multiple partners working in tandem to help grow the companies of their area and expand the workforce. And what I also hope we'll get into is some questions around how to measure a campaign like that. I know that's the theme of today, and there are a couple of different ways to address that. And then finally, I think it's important that a key theme to this work is the idea that it makes a really big problem seem manageable. So all of us, especially in this work, but everyone in the country really has been bombarded with all the news and all of the heartache and all the distress that the economy and the recession has caused many millions of people. And so when you look at that big picture, it can be very overwhelming. But the idea of adding just one job is something that seems possible. And so that's what, when we get into these local examples, that's what we're going to see has been part of the success of them. And speaking of local examples, it's really interesting that it's almost as though the zeitgeist was at work here, because the same idea of either add one, just add one job, all kinds of different ways of framing the same idea have cropped up. There's also a couple of sister national campaigns, such as the 1 in 3 initiative, which is run by the by the Association of Enterprise Opportunity. So that's the framing, and I hope that some of these examples will promote some good questions as we go through this. So a little bit of the background information. And again, I'm guessing that many of you have either seen this or you have most likely done some of this research yourself. But the Hamilton Project, which is sort of part of Brookings, did some research about a year back looking at what kind of recovery times we might expect to get back to really sort of in the employment levels that we had before the recession. And I think, this can be a fairly sobering graph, because as you take it apart, what you'll see is that if we were to create jobs at the best monthly rate from the 1990s, which was 321,000 jobs in a month, we would recover to pre-recession levels in about 2016. If we were to create at the best monthly rate in the 2000s, which was 208,000 jobs, we would recover in late 2020. And I think this kind of information was very compelling to a number of folks on the ground to think, oh my goodness, we're having, technically some expansion of the economy, and technically we're coming out of the recession. But how can any of us honestly look at a job seeker and say, well, things will get better in about 8 years? We can't do that. So that was some of the labor market research that helped drive the idea that we have to figure out a way to not only be better at placing information, but to really, not place information, not placing people, but also to really help address this job creation piece of the equation. So that was some labor market information. Now, I also wanted to note how Just Add One really reinforces some of the national research that we've been doing at NAWB, which talks about 4 areas of leadership capacity that we have seen workforce areas at the state and local levels who have really moved forward and made breakthrough investments and initiatives that have really helped their local economy. And so you can see that strategic management, data analysis, communications, advocacy, engagement, and then strategic convening are really the 4 areas that our research landed on. I think you'll particularly see how Just Add One underscores those bottom 2, the communications and strategic convening. I'm going to talk about how the Just Add One really drives home those ideas. And then finally, many of you, I hope, have seen some of Kristen's research that she did a couple of years back about enhancing workforce leadership, something called Leadership, which is available on the interweb. And after interviewing, I think, Kristen, I know you interviewed hundreds, perhaps thousands of workforce professionals, you really honed in on 6 areas of workforce leadership that you saw demonstrated in leading workforce leaders across the country. And I think that Just Add One, while it addresses almost all of these, really underscores embracing openness and encouraging experimentation. So I'll try and bring that back in as well. So let's go ahead and jump in to some of the local examples. And what I'd like to do is first focus on, I'm going to come back to Jefferson County. First start on Stanislaus County. Stanislaus County is in the Central Valley of California. It's east of the Bay Area, and it has been an area that has really stubbornly high unemployment through the past, through this recession. And in fact, at times in Stanislaus County, they were looking at official unemployment rates of 16.5%. And as we all know, that is often low when you take in other factors. So really stubbornly high unemployment. And before the Stand Together, which is what they called their Ad One initiative, before they did that, they had done a smaller initiative where their target was, can we add 100 jobs in 100 days? So they started really small, and they ended up in 100 days actually getting 200 hires to take place. So they thought, there's something about encouraging this kind of activity that seems to have results. What does this mean for our work? So they sort of continued along, and the organization I'm talking about is the Stanislaus Alliance, which is both an economic development as well as workforce organization. Well, a couple of months later, some of the staff at the Stanislaus Alliance, they were going down the street, they were out for lunch, and they were walking back, and they noticed that a small business that they often went to had just closed its doors. And, you know, it had just been open a week before, and there was something about seeing that happen on their main street that really triggered a sense of urgency. So they thought back to what had happened before, 100 jobs in 100 days, and they said, what if we up this a little bit? What if we reach out to businesses that we've already worked with? What if we make this 1,000 hires in 6 months? And so that's what they started doing. And what they decided to do was really try and frame this around the multiplier effect. So in other words, if one person gets hired, where does that person spend their money? And if they do hire that person in response to potential or real increase in demand, how does that affect their supply chain? And might their supply chain need to start hiring? So you're all familiar with this kind of framework from economic development. But they really framed it around, we can solve our own problems. This is not just the government, for example, coming in and having a program, but we can actually solve it ourselves. And so they put together a video, and they started small again. They began calling businesses that they had already worked with to talk about this. Well, what ended up starting to happen was the media caught on. And as you can imagine, in an area that had really persistent, nasty unemployment, there had been plenty of pretty depressing news for years, for a couple of years at least. So when the media caught on to this idea of, you know what, we can actually do something, we are empowered at our local level to improve this, they started getting a lot of press and a lot of coverage. And what ended up starting to happen was businesses that they had not worked with began to call them and began to ask how they could get involved. And in fact, even businesses who they had tried to work with often and tried to partner with often started calling as they started to hear this. And really, it's just started to develop a momentum of its own. And what is interesting here is that once they started talking to businesses and partnering with businesses and getting this sense of self-determination, if you will, they found a new receptivity for how some of the tools that the workforce system has can actually help those businesses do the kind of that they were coaching them to do. So you can see that they put, I would argue, relatively high standards on how they measured what counted as a job in the Stand Together initiative. So I think we can come back to this in the question and answer time, but the way they determined if this was a job that would count was that it did not exist or had not been filled in the past 12 months. It was permanent, and it averaged at least 30 hours per week. And over the course of 6 months, they had, I think, some quite impressive results. They found that they had over 1,000 people, over 1,000 jobs filled, and so you can see there 1,306. I mentioned that they started with companies they were already working with, and that grew. So over the 6-month period, they worked with 200 companies. Over half of them had not worked with this organization in the past 10 years. So it really grew their footprint. It grew their market penetration, if you will, to the businesses. And to underscore the earlier point, there was a partnership element to this as well. This was not only we're here to serve you as businesses, but together we can solve this job issue. The amount of mention and attention that they got in the print media went up 18-fold. The amount of mentions they got on the radio went up 6-fold, and the amount of mentions they got in television went up 4 times. And so as you can see, that was very, very different press. It was very different press than, hey, everyone, we have 15% unemployment. What are we going to do about that? Da, 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 da. This was, you know what? We worked together. We focused. We were empowered at the local level to do something, and we made it happen. So this was a really exciting accomplishment, and they did it in 6 months, and now they're looking at how they can work on that kind of framework again, and they're also looking at how they can become involved in the national discussion that we'll also come back to a little later in the presentation. So that was a snapshot of how that played out in the Central Valley of California. I'd like them to jump east and go to Karen's neck of the woods, as I mentioned. And Karen, you may have some information as well that will help flesh some of this story out. In Jefferson County, Colorado, which is just right outside of Denver, just west of Denver, they were not looking at an intense level of unemployment. Their unemployment was not at a great level, but it was not astronomical. It was paralleling the national levels, and in fact, it was a little bit better. But what is an interesting backstory to how Jefferson County found its way to their Add One initiative, which is what they called it, is they had an intern working at the one-stop centers, and in Colorado, they're all called workforce centers, and they're very much integrated with their workforce investment boards. And they were talking about some of their labor market data, and again, although their unemployment rate was not astronomical, they were seeing what many of us are seeing, which is the difficulty of how we can help long-term unemployed individuals and how we make sure that we're really moving the dial. And the intern asked this astoundingly simple question. What if every business in Jefferson County hired someone? We have 20,000 businesses in Jefferson County. What would happen? And of course, there would be, they did a little bit of number crunching, and they found that they would essentially have a full employment economy. And this is where I want to bring in some of the research out of leadership, this element of openness. How can you be open to new ideas? And so here we have the example of an intern asking a question, and then the leadership of the organization really took it to term and said, you know what, this is an idea that we need to think about. So a little bit similar to Stanislaus County, they did start framing it around how do we engage partners and how do we engage just around economic development. And so one of the first groups that they presented to was a State Economic Development Association. They said, what do you guys think about this idea? And they had a really positive response. Both economic development responded positively. Many of the businesses in the room responded positively, and they thought, you know what, this is something that we need to really develop. So what they started doing was they formed, and then thank you, Karen, I saw you posted in the chat, the ad1.org. I think you can also go to ad1.net, but ad1.org works. You'll see that they have formed really strong partnerships with 19 entities that include cities, chambers, economic development, community colleges, libraries, and even school districts, which I think is very exciting, who have agreed that this is something that they want to really support and really add on to. And so here's what actually happens. They've defined a process. What happens is businesses have heard about this Add One initiative, so they'll call the Workforce Center, and they will say, well, they will make a pledge. They will say, this is how many positions they intend to hire by the end of the year. And that actually goes on the website. So if you go to that website, you can see that they have both a full list if you click on it, but it is a very public declaration. And so this is another interesting element of their initiative, is that there is something about this public declaration that really helps form a culture around we can make a difference here. We can work together to make a difference, and we're going to publicly state that we're going to do that. At the same time, the Workforce Center then does share with this business, here's some resources that we can provide, that we can do, and we can collaborate with you to help make that hiring something that is more feasible. So what they then also realized was that if we're going to really make this pop, we're going to have to rethink some of our workforce services. We're going to have to rethink how we provide this. And they had done a little bit of research. They found that, in fact, only about 2% of the businesses in their region even knew about the workforce system at all. And they knew that they had a large number of job seekers that came through the doors and did not get work and did not come back. So they knew that this was an opportunity for them to really step up how they worked. So this helped drove a little bit of restructuring, internal restructuring, so that they could meet what became growing interest to partnership and an interest in services. So they actually went through and they did value stream mapping, they did process engineering, and from that learning, they did a little bit of restructuring and they did some leadership alignment. So I guess the point there is, by partnering with businesses, by getting people engaged in this idea of actually adding one job, it helped drive some really needed and necessary internal restructuring. And one of the people I talked there said, one of the things that helped us, one of the ideas that helped us think about this was that we need to think about having all kinds of qualified workers immediately available. and they felt like they hadn't been able to do that before. And if they were really going to be a partner in making this work with the business community, they needed to up their game. So it's been a really positive opportunity to do that. And what you'll see also on the website is they have put together a toolkit. And this toolkit really helps a business understand, okay, what would it actually take, you know, bottom line, dollars and cents for me to hire a new person. They have several forms that can help a business determine that when they think about taxes and workers' comp and all those kinds of business costs that they need to be considered with. Then they help the business determine what that number is, and then they can quickly turn around and say, do you know about our on-the-job training? Do you know about our incumbent worker training? And that helps to offset. Now they do their measurements a little bit differently. At this point, what they're looking to do is like I said, they're counting the number of jobs that have been promised. So their goal is to get 2,000 jobs pledged, I believe, by the end of this year. And they're looking to, at the same time, get 2,400 job seekers who have not been able to find work in the talent pool so that this matching can take place. And the goals of these pledges turning into real jobs will be done. I think I also talked to a staff member there and found that they're playing with a couple of additional ideas with the idea of Add One. When they looked at their labor market, they realized that a lot of great services are being directed towards veterans and providing really good services for returning veterans and veterans who are looking for work. But what they did realize is that there's not very much happening specifically for the spouses of veterans. So one little twist they're considering is add. They also looked at their labor market and realized that there was an opportunity to look at what was happening in terms of parents of young people who were in foster care, non-custodial parents. Can you add one non-custodial parent? So there are a number of ways that they are playing around with the framing of this. But it's really being able to drive a different kind of conversation. So as you can imagine, they also have some really excellent media coverage. And what you'll see is that it's not framed as a sort of workforce system initiative. They really have champions from the business community talking about why this is important. When we get to it, we won't do it quite yet, but the video I'll show you is a great example of a business person really being a champion of this and kind of, in a way, putting a little bit of peer pressure on her business colleagues in the region on why they should be a part of that. So those are the two examples that were really I wanted to give you a little bit more in depth. As I mentioned, these have been popping up in a number of places, so I recommend everyone also go ahead and check out Frederick Works. Frederick Works is in Maryland, and they have been doing something called One Job at a Time. So again, some very similar ideas as the other two we've just looked at. Their measure is they've calculated about 1,600 jobs created by over 600 employers, and they've also used a similar economic multiplier framework to help engage businesses in the idea about why this is going to be not only good for their organization, but really good for the overall economic climate. So what I wanted to then show everyone is the opportunity to get involved with this at a national level. So if those of you who are looking online and are jumping around on the internet, you can go to justadd1.net and you'll see some national branding that's going on around this. And the idea is how, like I mentioned at the beginning, how can we create a national initiative where these local efforts are customized and they're done in a way that makes sense at their local level, but then it's feeding up into a national initiative. So, in fact, we have some very really kind of exciting interest at local levels. Some out of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, some in the Finger Lakes area with a few different regions. Talking about a regional effort, some in the St. Louis area, and then actually in greater Phoenix in Arizona. There's the idea of how can we tailor this here. To bring back in the question of measurement, and again, we can get into this a little bit in Q&A, we're interested in what is the best way to measure what number of jobs and quality of jobs have been added. So right now we're looking at actually a national scorecard that would count a few things. The number of participating businesses, the number of jobs added, and then there's categories under that, which is either full-time, part-time, seasonal, or a contract worker. And part of our thinking behind this is that as we've had conversations with the Association for Enterprise Opportunity, we have realized that one of the sort of blind spots I think we have sometimes in the workforce system is it's been really hard to figure out the best way to track entrepreneurial development, small business development, even though those are also important and critical workforce issues. So we're looking at ways that we can better connect that. So please do feel free to go hop on that website and check it out. But I think what we're going to do is take a moment to look at this example out of Colorado, out of Jefferson County, and you'll see here a business leader who participated on a newscast talking about why this is important to her and to the whole area. So, and then do I understand that I need to leave my phone unmuted? I believe that's what I have to do so that we can make sure that everyone hears it. So before I start, I want to make sure that I'm not going to make everyone hear it double time. So I'm going to leave my computer speakers on. Does that mean, David, that I should mute my phone?
For a look at your money, we are talking about the Add One campaign that's going on right now in Jefferson County. The goal here is to get more folks back to work. Joining us at the Information Center to talk more about it, Y. Livingston, owner of Wystone Teas, which is located in Lakewood, the Belmar Center. Y, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Oh, it's great to see you too, Greg. How are you?
I'm doing great. First, let's talk about Add One. This is really a grassroots effort to try and generate jobs in your neck of the woods.
It absolutely is. I mean, we in Jefferson County have started this Add One campaign, which was launched at a golden
Colorado company called ERA. And it was launched
and it was launched a couple of weeks ago. And it's really our feeling that
this Add One campaign is exactly what the
as business owners and stakeholders in Jefferson County, that this Add One campaign is exactly what the county needs, really to get people back to work.
Let's talk about your business.
For small business. I mean, my business is a restaurant, tea cafe
You were recently appointed to the Colorado Workforce Development Council. What do you hope to accomplish?
Well, I hope to bring a voice for small business. I mean, my business is a restaurant tea cafe located in Belmar, and it is just amazing the number of opportunities that I think that small business owners like myself can give to the community.
The challenge here, the gauntlet's been laid. You know, look, we want to at least hire one person in each of these businesses in Jefferson County.
That's correct.
It sounds like a big goal, though. Can you think that can be accomplished?
I really do believe it can be accomplished. I mean, in Jefferson County, we have approximately 20,000 businesses, and so if each business hires one person, that's only if only 5% of those businesses hire one person, that's 1,000 jobs, and so that's pretty significant by anybody's measure.
Absolutely. When you put it in that perspective, it makes sense. So tell me how businesses can get involved.
Businesses can contact Jefferson County. Ad 1 is the campaign. It is really focusing on businesses becoming ambassadors for this initiative. And you really just have to let us know that you have a position available and just put that posting together in Jefferson County. Ad 1 will take care of it from there.
Absolutely. And are you going to take the pledge too?
I've already taken the pledge. Good. We have a couple of positions open. Literally, people are coming into the cafe on a daily basis, and we plan to hire and use this Ad 1 campaign, not just for this initiative, but as we continue to be a community participant in Jefferson County.
Good for you. Why, it's always great to see you. Ad1.org is the name of the website. Check out your tea. I love your tea, by the way.
Thank you. Come see us.
In essence, if you weren't able to hear it, just a very succinct and solid description from a local business owner, a small business owner, talking about the initiative. And again, I think what's worth noting is it was really about hiring people and about developing economic activity. There was no discussion about any hoops that needed to be jumped through. There was nothing about how this has to be done one way or another with the workforce system. So I think this gives the picture of how Ad 1 is a great way to really engage business as a partner and show how workforce and economic development can be driven by the business community and owned by the business community, and then as workforce professionals we can really underscore and support those efforts with the tools and processes that we have. And I know that Karen and her team in Colorado, and I'm sure all of you, I'm looking forward to learning more, are putting in place ways to really make these kinds of nimble ability to react and to speak the way businesses speak become more and more of a reality of how we do business engagement in the workforce system. So I do see the question that's up on the screen. Ideas are easier than cataloging the implementation of ideas. Or Ahmad, were you supposed to?
No, that's totally fine. That's totally fine. These are for you. I did want to jump in and just say that, Tim, these are great examples of how workforce leaders can be catalysts in their communities by partnering with business and a lot of other stakeholders. So thank you for those examples. Yeah, I don't mind reading these questions if that works for you, but please feel free to take them. So speaking of catalysts, I mean, this does say that ideas are easier than catalyzing the implementation of ideas, which is so true. So what pushed these efforts over the hump? In Stanislaus, it sounds like the closure of a business. What about elsewhere? Are there other examples where kind of this tipping point occurred?
Yeah. In doing a little bit of the research in Maryland, it appeared there as well that the economic multiplier framework of really putting numbers to what could happen in a region when one additional hire happened became a catalyst. And I do fully understand that that's not a new idea and that we have all known about that way of thinking, that way of measuring our work. But for some reason, it did seem that in a couple of these examples, that helped it. I also think that there is something about taking this huge problem of persistent unemployment and worklessness and really boiling it down to just adding one job. There's something empowering about that, and there's something that gives us the sense of, well, actually, I could do that. I might have to rearrange this. I might need to rethink a business process here, but I could do that. I think it's worth noting that this whole effort in both of these examples are about a year old. So I do think there's still some learning and analysis that has to take place about that. And I think there are also some concerns that should be addressed. For example, should this initiative gain a lot of steam and businesses start deciding that they need to pledge before they actually have the business case to do that, then clearly this could become a problem, because then you have people trying to hire when they really aren't ready. So I do think there's some readiness component to it that has to be addressed, but again, business services professionals can help, and that's part of why this toolkit of helping understand what is the actual cost of hiring someone, and are you in the position to do that, that's a really important step. But to summarize, Ahmad, I think if there was a thread, it was seeing this economic multiplier effect and playing with the idea of how that could actually really help local economies. Great.
So we have a second question here, and that is, so how did these communities actually get started? What was the first thing that they did as conveners and organizers? What did the conveners and organizers do before the media caught on?
Absolutely. Well, I think the Jefferson County one is a good example. Well, actually, they both are. In Jefferson County, they called it, they even used the terminology proof of concept. So internally, after this intern asked the question, what would happen if the 20,000 businesses in Jefferson County hired, they really took that to task, and so they started internally thinking that through and putting together some of the framework. But before they sort of launched into full-blown media, they did go to a number of other associations and economic development organizations, and they said, we're thinking about this, what do you think? So I don't know what would have happened if, for example, they had gone to this economic development conference and got a lukewarm response. Frankly, I'm not sure how that would have played out, but that's not what happened. They got an overwhelmingly positive response. So I think that's how it developed in Jefferson County, and with the positive response, it did begin to just kind of take on a little bit of steam of its own. Now, I think also in Stanislaus County, they also started small. They started with businesses they had already worked with, and it was really the enthusiasm of those businesses became infectious, and as I mentioned before, it started growing to businesses who they had not worked with, who they had not partnered with, and that's when the media came in. So if I was to try and draw a parallel between those two, I do think they both started small. They didn't immediately blast out with a full-blown media campaign, and they had a few key partners, either businesses or other development entities, on board, and then it really popped and moved forward.
Great. So Tim, as you know, one of the results of, catalytic work is that it really can inform the system of new emerging ideas coming out of the activities. So how did this kind of employer engagement change the kind of services the system provides to employers? Did it have any impact there?
I think it absolutely did, and I'm sure again, I want to note that Karen Hoops is right there in Colorado, so she probably has even additional information to add to this. But in my conversation with some of the staff from Jefferson County, it really did have an impact on rethinking the kinds of services that were provided. So they actually worked with the Colorado Association of Manufacturing and Technology to really chart their process of how do we evaluate moving job seekers to jobs and meeting business needs. And they said it was not an easy process, and it was not very fun because this group was apparently very helpful, but also very blunt and honest, and they realized that there were a number of steps, a number of things that they needed to rework. And I think they were quite honest with me that it's not been easy. It has not been it's not been a cakewalk, and it's been difficult because it's difficult for all of us to change the way that we do our work. So this has meant that they've really rethought how they do the assessment of both businesses coming in, but also of job seekers. They've tried to rethink what is the best way to make investments. It's not always necessary that someone go sit in training, but maybe someone actually is ready to work, and that's okay. So again, I think we could get kind of in the weeds there, but it was a catalyst for rethinking their business process because suddenly they had willing partners from the business community that were also looking to make sure that they were a partner that could deliver on how to help.
Great. Well, Tim, these were great examples, great presentation, so I want to thank you very much for providing all of us with that today. And if you have any additional questions for Tim on this, you can get in contact with him or us, and we'll get in contact with him. But outside of that, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen.
Thanks.
Hi, team. So thanks so much, Ken and Tim. That was great. It's been a while since we've done these quick chats, and so we thought we'd throw a couple in here to get you thinking about how is it that what you just heard can impact your own work. So let's just take a minute. We have 3 chats, and the first one here is on the screen. So everybody can use the chat box just below where it says type notes here, our usual one where we're all sharing, the one just below the slides. What was the most compelling thing you heard in our discussion about Ad1? So if the teams could just go ahead and share their ideas about what's the most compelling thing you heard. I see Kari is typing. And there's Marilyn typing. So we'll just give them a second to roll in. I quite love this part, actually, just kind of waiting for what people are gonna enter here. Okay, so using the economic multiplier to share positive effects. Compelling. Not here to serve you, here to be your partner, says Kay. Yep. Okay, looks like Rick from Minnesota is going to make a contribution here. And Marilyn from Montana is going to come back. Public pledging. Interesting. Yeah, I put a little note in the side chat here, but this reminds me a little bit. There was a movement for a while that started out of Boston, actually. Ken probably knows a lot about it. Community compacts. I think there's also one in Northern California, and I know there are quite a few in the Midwest. And the idea was to get businesses engaged in providing summer jobs for youth. That's where it started. And then some of it morphed into 100% college or 100% high school graduation rates and other things. But it was the same idea, this idea of businesses publicly pledging to help solve a problem. So, so this is an interesting aspect. Thanks, Marilyn, for the comment about Montana. Oh, interesting. Andrew, we'll have to look that up, Race to Place. If one of my colleagues could go ahead and look that up and put the website in the chat window, that would be great. So it looks like a few more people are typing, so we'll give it another minute or two. Oh, great. Thank you, Sam. Sam just put some information about Race to Place there, which was Andrew's suggestion. Just put it in the side window there. Economic multiplier effect is, that seemed like it resonated with lots of you. Oh, and thanks, Andrea, for the connection to Stacy. This is great. It looks like Jacqueline is going to make a contribution here too. Yeah, this public contribution. So the two things that really seemed to resonate for people was this sort of public declaration and then the idea of the economic multiplier effect. So that's great. Okay, so we're going to move on now to the next question, which is what lessons does the Ad1 model offer about employer engagement? And we may have actually, some of your responses from the last question actually started to get at this a little bit. So maybe we'll make this one a little bit shorter, but just invite contributions that are different from those to the last question. So what lessons does this offer about employer engagement for you? I see that Kari and Kay are submitting responses. I just can't wait for these to come in. I always sort of sit here and, oh, I just can't wait. Be a catalyst, be open, and be positive. Yep. We talked a lot about this. In fact, this reminds me a little bit when we first started meeting, and we talked a lot about what our value proposition was, what was the value we're actually delivering, and we had lots of conversations about there is value in service, and there is also value in information, and there is value in being able to open a door, and this is another kind of value, sort of being a catalyst for solving community problems. And Kay, thank you, Kay, for your very blunt assessment. The initiative is about hiring, not jumping through hoops for the workforce system. Indeed. Oh, and thank you, Tim, for sharing Stanislaus County's video. And we'll, of course, organize all of these a little bit and send them out as notes, so you'll have them all together. Oh, this is solving very complex problems by the simple act of many. Very nicely put, Karen. So we'll give it about another minute and then move on to the last question. Oh, yeah, Marilyn, nice comment. Clarifies the importance of business in the whole picture of economic growth. Okay, I'm going to move on now to the last question, And this one is similar to the other ones, but it's more focused on your own teams and your own states and your own work. So what is a takeaway from the Ad1 discussion that is most relevant to your state's employer engagement effort or strategy, your effort to engage employers? What is most relevant as a takeaway point from what you heard to your state, your team, or your particular strategy? Okay, now you've got me very eager to see your responses because so many of you are typing that it won't actually show me your names. Go bigger. Take the campaign statewide and integrate it with rapid response. Very nice. Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Ken. Another method for initiating engagement of business. Very good. So something that goes beyond service or is just different than service. It also, you know, I hope that it also reminds everyone on the call of a sort of other layers of value that they provide. You know, it's often we count services, we count enrollments, we count things, and so sometimes it can be easy to see those things as the sum total of the value we deliver. But actually, you know, so much of it is in our relationships with other people. Andra helps with the branding and knowledge of services available through the public workforce system. Absolutely. Always better to have business selling your brand than you directly. So yeah, indeed. I think when we send you out the newscast video, I think you'll see that in there. And Steve says sometimes we focus on certain industry clusters, but Ad1 demonstrates the importance of the mom and pop business to the overall health of the economy. Excellent point, Steve. Really good. And Kari, the statistics regarding how little businesses know about what Workforce does shows this idea can initiate dialogue and partnerships based on community rather than agency needs. Nice observation, Kari. And Colleen, community involvement, definitely the secret to success. Indeed. Yay! These are great comments. Thanks, everybody. So we'll just give it one more minute. Oh, nice, Jacqueline, that we are on track in helping to drive collaboration amongst our partners inside and outside the agency. Start small, build trust, and then engage media. Thanks, Kay. These are great. This is just a great set of lessons. So thank you so much for that. And we are going to move on now. And I am going to hand the floor back to Ahmad for any closing comments.
Great. Thanks, Kristen. Those are some great answers and great presentations. Just a lot of rich information. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today and participating and providing your input that from the information that we learned from Tim and Ken. And if you have any additional questions as we move forward into our third web meeting or web event tomorrow, please feel free to either email or call me, or email or call Kristen. And also, just one last reminder, we're still continuing to collect information from the state. So if any of this presentation today brought up some ideas around what you're doing in your states that you would like to share with your colleagues, please send it to us and get in contact with Sam McCoy. He's still looking to bring all of your great work into what we're trying to put together so that we could share with others. So with that said, I would like to turn it over to Jonathan with DOL for, yep. Jonathan.
Great. Thanks, Ahmad, and thanks to everybody who presented today, Tim and Ken, Ahmad, Kristen, Sam, Dave, and the rest of the SPR team. You guys are great today. I don't have anything new today. Same as I said yesterday. If you have any questions regarding getting in contact or getting materials from any of these presentations or speakers today, feel free to reach out to them, or if you need their contact information, I can provide that to you as well. We really want to keep promoting this peer sharing, because I think there's a lot of overlap between some of the projects that everybody's working on between all the EBE states. So, like Ahmad said, we look forward to tomorrow's final webinar number 3 on the virtual learning series, and we'll meet up again tomorrow. So thank you, everybody.